Hey friends, welcome to Sabbath School Daily, where we have been studying from this lesson right here, 3 Cosmic Messages. This week we have been studying from lesson number 8, which has the title, The Sabbath and the End, and today is Wednesday's lesson, which has the title, Creation, the Sabbath, and the End Time. Today's lesson is based off of 3 verses found in Revelation 14, which are verses 7, 9, and 12. This is what it says. Verse 7 says, "Saying with a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who has made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water." Then verse 9 says, "Then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and his image and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation." So I read 9 and 10 over there. And then verse 12 says, "Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus." Now, what these verses are talking about and what today's lesson really is about is how the Sabbath stands as the final test of faith and obedience for God's end-time people. The reason why this is so important, the reason why the Seventh-day Adventists consider Sabbath so important, is not only that it appears throughout the Bible as God's designated day of worship, but since worship is at the central point of Revelation, it's at the central core of what the book is about. You'll see that from chapter 12 to 14, the main point, the main ideal, the climax of the book, everything revolves around worship. And when you look at these verses that we just talked about, that we just read, you'll see that worship is at the foundation of it. In the first one, you have a call to worship God. Worship him. Why? Because he is the creator. He is the maker. He is the one that engineered, the architect of humanity and of the world. In the second verse, verse 9, you'll see that there is a call to remove yourself, to step out, to go out from the false, the counterfeit system of worship that we find in our world. And finally, you'll see that the true test of loyalty, the patience of the saints, is identified. These saints are recognized as those who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. Now, we've already mentioned this in a previous day this week, but if you go back to what I had said about those 7 days of creation, where God creates an environment, he creates an atmosphere in the first 3 days. In the latter 3 days, he then fills, he fills those atmospheres, he fills those locations or those places, right? Those environments, he fills it with that which will inhabit it, right? So you see on the first day, you have day and night. You have the cycle of the day. On the third day, on the fourth day, you see God creating the lesser light and the greater light. The greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. You find the stars. On the second day, you see God creating a body of water and separating that from the firmament or from the dome, right? From the sky. And then on the fifth day, God creates the fish and the birds, which are the things that inhabit those waters and the skies. And then on the sixth day, when God creates the dry land and the vegetation, he then creates on the sixth day that which will inhabit the vegetation, the dry land, right? And that will feed off the vegetation. So you see that on each consecutive day, later, God then consecutively creates that which will inhabit those days. But the Sabbath day is different because God creates the day, he blesses, he hollows it, he sets it apart, and then he fills it with himself. He puts himself in that day. Friends, the Sabbath is altogether different. If God had not said so, then okay, then we could get away with saying, well, it doesn't really matter what day it is, but no, the God of the Bible is an extremely detail-oriented being, and he commanded us to keep the Sabbath day. That's why it's in the 10 Commandments, precisely the one commandment that God told us not to forget. There are those who want to say that this is a Jewish institution. Friends, the Sabbath was there before the creation of, right after the creation of humanity, but it was there before the fall. It was there certainly before Abraham. It's not a Jewish religious institution. This is a biblical universal institution, one of the only 2 that precede the fall of mankind, which is marriage and Sabbath. So the Sabbath, it arises, it stands as the last stand because the Sabbath is the only commandment where when you consider all the other commandments, you see that they are fairly easy to do, right? Fairly simple, or at least it's hard to get away with breaking them, right? If you kill someone, I mean, that's very obvious. If you steal something, you'll get caught sooner or later. If you lie, you'll get caught in a web of lies. If you live a life of discontentment, right? If you're always coveting, that shows and that poisons your life. If you don't honor the authorities in your world, primarily your first authorities, your mom and your dad, your parents, well, that will inflict pain on the rest of your life. You'll reap the rewards of breaking that commandment. The first 3 commandments, it goes the same way. It's very obvious when you commit idolatry, right? Or all of these commandments. I had forgotten to mention the 7th one, adultery. Again, that'll poison your relationship, poison your marriage, poison your life, really. So you see that all of these commandments, they're very easy to discern. The Sabbath commandment, that's where you make a stand as to whom you obey, right? We only keep the Sabbath, friends, because God told us to. We only keep the Sabbath because God did something, right? The other commandments, of course, they have to do with God's personality, with God's character, but you could justify it away, right? There are several people who don't believe in God, but they don't kill, they don't lie, they don't steal. Many of, they don't commit adultery. You don't really see them committing committing open idolatry, right? But the Sabbath, it's a make it or break it, right? Someone only keeps the Sabbath because God said so. You don't really find a bunch of Sabbath. You don't find any Sabbath keepers that are doing it for any other reason than for the fact that God commanded it in the Bible. So the Sabbath, it stands in the end time as a direct point, contention point, trigger point where you apply your obedience. Who will I obey? God or anyone else? Myself or a government or a religious institution? Who do you obey? That is the question. Because at the end, the question is also, who do you worship? Who do you adore? Who is your God is the real question. So I hope that makes sense. The Sabbath is a blessing. Never forget that. Sabbath, you're at home, is always a day of rest. It's a busy day. We go to church, and I'm a pastor, so it's always a busy day at church, but it is spiritual rest nonetheless. So I hope that today's lesson encourages you to study a little bit more about this, to have a little bit more to share about the Sabbath and why it's so important. There are several good books to be read about this. The Bible is the first of them. So please remember to study your lesson, look up the Bible verses, go a little bit deeper. That will help you understand a little bit more about God, about the Scripture, about the Bible, and about your relationship to it all. Also, please remember to write down your questions, contemplate it, right? Think about it, process the information. Also, please remember to like, to share, and to subscribe to our videos. We release one every day, and I hope to see you again here tomorrow for another Sabbath School Daily.